The rain in Memphis came at an angle that night, driven by a crosswind that turned Beale Street neon into streaks and blurred the edges of the river. Avery Cole pulled her blazer tight and jogged across the service lot behind a 24-hour grocery where the lights hummed and one fluorescent tube shivered itself into a nervous stutter. Her rental car sat there like a stranded fish hood, popped hazard lights pecking at the dark. The dash had died a mile back. Then the phone. Somewhere between the site visit on Front Street and the gas station where she coasted to a stop, her wallet had vanished too. She had retraced the path to the counter, twice wet footprints marking two useless circles. The clerk behind bulletproof glass did not look up from his crossword. Cash only until the storm passed. No extensions, no exceptions. The generator hummed and shook the rack of breath mints. Avery stood there with her palms open like a person trying to catch rain. She was 27 and tired and good at solving problems that came with blueprints and bids and city hearings. She had walked through demolition sites with boots and a hard hat, calculated load, bearing in her head talked a skeptical neighborhood council into trusting her firm with a block that smelled of old sawdust and Sunday suppers. She was not good at being a person, without a phone, without an ID, without a way to jump a dead battery on a car that did not belong to her. A little girl in a yellow raincoat padded up to the door, leaving a trail of glossy droplets. She pressed her nose to the glass. Her hair was braided close to her scalp. Her backpack had a dandelion stitched on the pocket. Behind her, a man shook his umbrella hard and then folded it with a practiced snap. He wore a gray hoodie under a battered denim jacket. His shoes were wet through. He looked like he knew what it was to carry weight with quiet arms. The girl's voice had a careful softness. "Daddy, why is that lady standing like that?" The man followed her gaze to Avery, who had the look of someone trying to keep the pieces of herself stacked. He noticed the empty keyring in her fingers. He noticed her eyes scan the counter for a kindness that was not there. He noticed the clerk not noticing. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice had a baritone steadiness that turned the noisy rain down a degree. Avery pulled herself upright out of habit the way she did in rooms where people waited for her cues. "I will be," she said. My phone died. My wallet is gone. And the car." She gestured toward the useless hood. "I need a gas can and a jump or a cab or something that works like a miracle. I will figure it out." The man slid his hand into his jacket pocket and drew out a folded wad. It had the bruised look of bills that had been handled too many times, counted uncounted, put back. He smoothed a 20 and a 5 on the counter and tilted his head toward the clerk. "Gas can," he said, "and a prepaid for 5 on pump 2. And can we borrow that jump pack when you are done with your crossword?" The clerk did not argue with money. He shoved a red plastic can through the slot and pointed at the jump starter like it was an old dog too lazy to bite. The girl's eyes went wide. Rain pinged the metal awning. Avery stepped back as if the bills were a heat she did not deserve. "I cannot take that," she said. "It is all right. I will wait out the storm." The man looked at his daughter. The girl lifted her shoulders like she was making herself brave. "We will be fine," the man said. "The bus will be late anyway." He offered the can and the jump starter with a small nod that asked nothing. "Just help someone else when it is your turn." The line broke in her chest with a clean sound. No performance could hold against it. Avery took the can with both hands and bit down on the impulse to say, "I will pay you back with interest. I will get your information. I will make it fair." He did not want a ledger. He wanted something simpler and heavier. She followed him into the rain. They worked in rhythm. He steadied the can while she poured. He clamped the cables with the competence of someone who had been the steady person in shifty weather. The little girl counted quietly like it was a ritual. When the engine coughed and caught, the man stepped back with a grin that warmed the cold night a notch. Avery felt a gratitude so immediate it made her throat ache. "Thank you," she said, and it sounded small next to what it meant. He shrugged as if to say, the world owed you a decent turn now and then. The bus pulled up, lights swimming through the rain. He held his daughter's hand, the dandelion bobbing on her backpack. He lifted his free hand once toward Avery like a goodbye you do not put words on. "Wait," Avery said, but not loudly enough to stop the doors from closing. She watched them take 2 seats by the window. The girl waved. The man did not look back. Then the bus and the rain and the night moved on. Avery slid into the rental, exhaled like a building settling, and drove toward the bridge that divided river from city and strangers from the people you carry with you after the lights have gone. She did not know his name. She only knew the angle of his kindness and the small determination in a little girl's braided head. She put both away somewhere careful. Mornings at the cooperage were loud the way hope is loud. The old warehouse smelled of coffee and new drywall. Avery had taken the long lease months earlier when it was still sawdust and pigeons. Now it was a half-opened promise, a community kitchen that would rent stations by the hour, a bakery incubator, a few stalls for vendors who needed 4 walls and a legal stove to make a dream into something you could eat. Her firm had designed the changes to the block. She had fought for the idea of it in rooms where the word community was sometimes just a garnish. It was a Monday when she first saw him again. She did not recognize him at first because he was in motion, and people look different when they are doing what they are good at. The pop-up brunch stand had a line music low from a speaker, pancakes sighing on the griddle. He stood behind the flat top in a white apron streaked with batter, flipping, with his wrists moving with a smooth concentration. The little girl with the dandelion backpack sat on a milk crate coloring a page with a rocket ship. Her braids were the same. The raincoat hung on the back of a chair like a retired warrior. Avery stopped in the walkway without meaning to. The man called out, "Plate up," and slid a short stack under a cloud of whipped butter. He smiled at a customer. His smile bent the hard day outside into something almost bright. She waited until the rush eased. She bought a biscuit and a coffee because she needed a reason to stand there. When he looked up and handed her change, recognition flickered over his features, the way heat shimmers over asphalt. He took a half-second to place her face out of context without the rain and the dead rental and the red plastic gas can. "You made it out," he said. "That is a relief." "I did. Thank you again for that night. You did not even tell me your name." He wiped his hands on a towel and stuck one out like a person who did not mind bridges. "Malik," he said. "This is Zoe." He looked down at his daughter. "Zoe, this is the lady we helped when the rain got loud." Zoe gave a solemn wave. "I like your boots," she said. "They look like they can step in puddles." "They can." Avery leaned in a little like you do when you want to meet a child where she is. "I am Avery. Your pancakes look like they could solve things." Malik grinned. "They cannot fix the world," he said, "but they mind their part of the street." They talked in the simple way strangers do when there is a thread already tied between them. She learned that Malik worked nights at a downtown diner and ran this weekend pop-up for rent money and sanity. She learned he had taught himself to bake biscuits that rose like little miracles because his grandmother measured with her palm and memory. She learned that Zoe loved space and wanted to name a planet after her grandmother. She learned there were always ways to keep grief close and still keep moving. She did not tell him who she was, not the parts that made people square their shoulders or soften their voices. She said she worked in design and neighborhood projects, and that she was helping open the cooperage because she believed in kitchens as engines. It was not untrue. It was not all of it. Over the next weeks, Avery found reasons to be at the cooperage more often than her calendar justified. She checked punch lists already complete. She carried a clipboard so no one would ask why her hands were empty. She stood in Malik's line and asked about the way he folded fat into dough. He answered with patience and small jokes like a person who had carried heavy things and learned to set some of them down. On a Wednesday night, after a city meeting, she stopped by the diner where he worked. It was the kind with vintage chrome and booths that had seen better promises. He caught sight of her at the counter and made a face that hid a little happiness badly. He poured her coffee. He asked if the counsel had been decent. She said decent as a top note. She asked when he slept. He said, in pockets. She went home to a loft she rarely admitted she could afford without blinking. She thought about the way Malik's hands moved when he folded a kitchen towel. She slept like a person who was being carefully watched by the part of herself that knew when she was close to something she might not be able to control. It was Zoe who drew the first picture that stayed on Avery's refrigerator, a rocket with a biscuit on the side where the emblem should be. The crayon letters read, Biscuit 1. The stick figure astronauts had braids and a ponytail. One Saturday morning, Avery reached for milk and touched the corner of the paper like it could answer a question she had not spoken out loud. The notice went up 3 blocks from the cooperage stapled to a telephone pole with a rust bite at the base. A hand wrote a question mark in the margin. Underneath, someone else wrote, Rent is not a hobby. A third hand added, Amen. The poster was an announcement for a zoning change on a parcel that held a 1-story strip of stores, a bail bonds place that never slept, and a diner with a neon egg on its sign. Malik's Diner. It was not his name on the deed, but it was where his paycheck came from, and where the community found him at 2 a.m. when the night was a little too loud. The parcel had been acquired quietly by a development group, a Delaware LLC with a polite title and a mailbox for an office. The proposal said mixed use with ground floor retail and upper floor work lofts at market rate. The sort of words that made people feel both ways, depending on how often they had had a door closed behind them. Avery read the notice privately, first email subject lines that spoke in euphemisms she knew how to decode. Her firm had secured the parcel months before with a private partner. She had argued that if it could not be saved as it was, it could be remade with intention. She had planned to fight for a community benefits agreement, for affordable leases, for a path for small businesses to return. She had a draft of the design that still smelled like pencil. She had a rollout plan that started with the cooperage and moved outward. She had a clean map. She did not have Malik on it yet. That Saturday, the cooperage hosted an open house. Makers set out samples. Kids chased balloons. Avery stood where she could see everything and check off items on a list clipped to a board. Malik had his griddle set up near the old loading doors. He wore a new apron Zoe had insisted they buy. He coaxed batter into circles. They were not circles, Zoe corrected anyone who asked. They were little moons. If you are not careful, Avery thought, you will start naming the moons too. She was mid-thought when a group of people from the neighborhood came through, holding copies of the notice paper, damp from palms. Someone had a stack of printed comments they were planning to deliver to City Hall. They had underlines. They had heat. They stopped near Malik's stand. Someone said out loud the name of the development group. Someone else said that whoever was behind it was about to make a lot of money. Someone else said the diner was as good as gone. Avery heard the way Malik's breath paused. He flipped a pancake that did not want to land flat. Who is behind it? He asked, careful. He asked like a person who had learned to prepare for impact and still measure for hope. A woman from the neighborhood watch answered. "It is a bunch of partners," she said. "Shell companies inside other shells. But there is one local group at the front of it. Coal and Stone. Heard of them?" The woman shrugged. "Heard their principal is some young hotshot who talks good about keeping the soul of the block and then rents it back to us with a shiny bow." Avery felt the air thin the way it does on a high floor when the windows do not open. She put her clipboard down like you set a glass near an edge you do not trust. Malik looked from the paper to the woman to Avery. His face held a kind of stillness that is not indifference but defense. "Your last name is Cole, is it not?" he said softly. Everything in Avery wanted to divide and soften and postpone, to keep the two worlds from colliding just a few more days, until she could bring him the plan, with real protections spelled out, until she had something that proved her word was not a costume. She chose the truth late and messy. "Yes," she said. "And I should have told you sooner. I should have told you the first day after you brought my car back to life in the rain. I am part of that group. I have been building a framework to keep the diner to make sure you are not priced out. I have been trying to do it right. It matters to me. People say I have been trying, when what they mean is I have not told you yet," Malik said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet did the work. "Did you come stand in my line to test a story? Did you drink coffee on my break to see if the subject would walk into your lens?" "No," Avery said, and the word broke in her mouth. "I came because the night you helped me felt like a door I was meant to walk through without my title on. I came because you and Zoe felt like a piece of the city I did not want to design around." Zoe watched from her milk crate, worry creasing her forehead into small waves. Malik looked at her daughter and then at Avery. The line between worry and anger crossed his face and went still. "I have had people help me and then send a bill," he said. "I have had people tell me about a plan that sounds like a church and feels like a lock. If you were anybody else, this is where I would thank you for the pancakes you bought and keep you outside the door of my real life. But you are not anybody else, and you have a set of keys." "I know," Avery said. "That is why I am going to use them where you can see me. No shell companies, no late reveals. If I cannot convince you it is good in daylight, I do not deserve to try in the dark." It did not fix anything. It did not erase the feeling of a trap sprung a second too late. But it planted something that would matter later. That night, Avery went home and pulled the strings on her project until her hands hurt. She made a list of the ways she would be watched and the ways she wanted to be. Memphis has a way of testing whether your ideas work when you are tired. The next month did not have enough hours in it. Meetings with the city to lock in an enforceable community benefits agreement. Hours with pro bono attorneys who wrote clauses that said, if the rent for returning tenants was not what they had been promised, the second phase would not break ground. A carve-out for locally owned businesses with percentage rent caps. A letter of intent for the diner that contained numbers and teeth. A section that said, if an existing worker wanted to incubate a food truck at the cooperage, the lease would start at $1 for 6 months while revenue found its feet. Avery showed up to all of it with her name on the agenda and her sleeves rolled. She did not send a proxy. She asked for public comment, even when friends told her it would make the process slower. She answered questions that tasted of old betrayals without becoming brittle. She did not call Malik or stop by the diner. She knew the way being near him made her want to fix things fast with charm and promises, and she knew that charm and promises were not what this needed. It needed a stack of paper that could keep its spine when the inevitable wind came. Malik heard pieces of it the way you hear a song through a wall, A neighbor came in with a copy of the draft agreement and set it down next to a plate, jabbing at a clause. "This one," she said, "this one means the rent cannot jump 50% without a hand fight." He nodded. He did not let himself call it good. He had a daughter who loved rockets. He had learned to check the launch schedule and the weather both. One afternoon, before the city council vote, a letter arrived at the diner with Malik's name on it in careful script. He opened it with the tip of a butter knife. Inside was a copy of the final memorandum with sticky notes flagging the parts that pertained to returning tenants. A printed invitation to a public charrette where the design team would present options, and a handwritten page from Avery. "I cannot erase that I showed up in your life under one name and kept another in my pocket," she wrote. "What I can do is put my name on paper where it counts and stand in front of you while I hold it. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to come watch." He let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. He could hear his grandmother's voice from when he was a child and got into something complicated. "Baby," she would say, "some bridges you cross with your eyes open and your shoes tied tight." The night of the vote, the council chamber was overcrowded and overheated. People waved signs that said, "Save our stories," and "Progress is not a four-letter word." Avery stood and spoke in simple sentences. She did not use the words stakeholders or synergy. She talked about ovens and grief and the way a block's memory lives in the taste of what is cooked there. She said the market is not a god. She said if we are going to ask people to believe anything, we ought to say it in a way the neighborhood can see out the window. When she finished, there was that polite clatter that happens in rooms like that, when people do not know if they are allowed to clap. In the back row, Malik stood with his arms folded and his jaw working. He felt something in him shift a degree. It was not forgiveness. It was orientation. The vote passed. Not unanimous. Nothing good is. Enough to stand up. Papers were signed under lights that made everyone look a little tired and a little real. Later in the hallway outside the chamber, Avery found Malik waiting. He held the memorandum in one hand and his hat in the other. Zoe had fallen asleep against his hip, her braid pressed into his jacket. The moment looked like a photograph that would live in some family album if they got the rest of it right. "You did not hide," he said. His voice did not give her a place to land. It did not push her away either. "I am trying to make the kind of promise I do not have to beg you to believe," she said. He nodded. He looked down at Zoe, then back up. "I am not good at letting people help me," he said. "The last time I did, I learned that if the help is not held in the open, it comes with hooks. If I take something from you, it has to be a thing I can say out loud." "Then take this," Avery said, and she handed him a printed application for a micro-grant the cooperative had set up with a few local backers whose names she did not need to borrow. It was to fund permits and equipment for food truck pilots. The application was short. The scoring rubric was public. The committee had more grandmothers than bankers on it. She had picked each person by calling the teachers she trusted and asking who showed up to bake sales without wanting their name on the banner. He took the paper. He held it like it might bite and then realized it did not have teeth he could not see. "I do not want a thing with your name buried in it," he said. "Then keep reading," she answered, and he saw that the only place her name appeared was under a line that said, "If you are awarded this grant, who do you want informed first so they can clap too?" He looked up at her. His face was still and soft, both which is a hard thing to be at once. "I do not know how to be in this with you yet," he said. "That is all right," she said. "Just do not walk away. We can figure out the footwork on level ground." The kitchen fire started small in the back of the diner, the sort of flare that happens when a fryer feels crowded and oil decides to climb. A line cook killed the pilot light and reached for the extinguisher, but the gauge was not where it should be. And time in a kitchen moves fast when it is measured in flame. Malik grabbed the heavy red canister off the wall, yanked the pin, and aimed low. The fire coughed and flattened. Someone tripped the alarm, and the room filled with the secular incense of suppressant foam. The neon egg flickered once and steadied. The owner cursed and then remembered to breathe, and then started doing math about insurance and deductibles that made him look older. The fire department arrived in a cluster of gear and calm. They moved like their boots met a beat the rest of us cannot hear. One caught Malik's eye. "You got there fast," he said. Malik shrugged. The fryer looked like it forgot who it was for a minute. A week later, Malik learned from a friend that the extinguisher he had used had been overdue for a service. He also learned that the city's record showed it had been certified. He did not like the taste of that. He had a kid who ate grilled cheese at the counter once a week. He had a body that remembers the heat of a wrong day. He called the number on the sticker and ended up with a receptionist who put him on hold and never came back. He wrote down the serial number. He took photographs. He walked the extinguisher into the office at the cooperage and set it on the counter, like a thing that ought to be seen. Avery was there with her team pencil behind her ear, eyes muddy with the color work gets when it has been heavy for a while. She looked up. She saw the unease under Malik's careful. He showed her the sticker and the record, and the part where the math did not make sense. She said, "Give me a day, and we will find out who did not do their job." He said, "You mean that like a person who has a file drawer for this?" She said, "I have a folder on my desktop called Things We Do Not Pretend We Did Not See." The next afternoon, a city inspector walked the block with a clipboard and a new seriousness. The extinguisher company got a letter with dates and fines on it. The diner owner got a checklist with a deadline and actual help to meet it. None of it would make a viral video. All of it meant the next fire would be smaller. Avery did not mention that she had called in a favor with the fire captain who had helped her father when she was 12, and the world scared her more than usual. She did not mention that she had used the kind of leverage that can skew a scale if you are not careful. She did not want to look like a savior at a time when what she was trying to be was a neighbor with a clipboard and a phone. She did tell Malik she was proud of him for not letting it slide. He did not smile. He did not frown. He said, "I am tired of learning after the fact that there was a fix if someone had cared 3 minutes sooner." That weekend, Zoe drew a picture of a red canister with a smiling face. She wrote under it in block letters, "The fire was wrong and we were ready." The charrette was in the old gym at the community center, the one with a scoreboard that never worked, and a smell that was part floor wax, part history. Folding chairs in rows, foam boards on easels with colored renderings. Avery hated renderings. They looked like lies with accurate shadows. She had made her team pin up process sketches too, with eraser marks visible so people could see how a building grows from a question. Neighbors came in with arms crossed and sat with their feet planted like they were ready for a push that might be coming. A few critics from across town showed up with the kind of skepticism that does not fit in a chair. The councilman sat near the aisle like a chaperone. The bankers did not come. They rarely do. Avery stepped to the front and told the story she could not stop returning to. Not the one about zoning or floor area ratios. The one about a night when the rain climbed the wind and a stranger used his last cash to get a car moving. She said what that did to her was make the line between renderings and reality shorter. She said she wanted to talk like the building would talk when it was finished. No marble in the lobby, good tile behind the grill's windows that opened. She said the diner's neon egg would be remounted on a new facade wiring up to code, and a dimmer in case a baby fell asleep in the booth under it. She said the cooperage would give the food truck pilots a berth and a health inspector who acted like a teacher, not a cop. She did not name Malik on a microphone. She did not put him on display. When she finished, she asked if anyone wanted to speak. A woman stood up and said she would believe it when she saw a lease with numbers that did not feel like a joke. Avery held up a draft. The woman asked who had the pen. Avery said, "You can." There was a shape at the back of the room that Avery felt before she saw it. Malik stood there with Zoe holding his hand. Zoe's eyes were large with a child's willingness to be surprised. Malik's face had the set of someone who stayed because he said he would. He raised his hand and the room turned to him. He said, "I am not here to vouch. I am here to say I gave the person at the front of the room $25 worth of jam and a little faith one night when the sky was sideways. She did not ask for either. I am here because I want to see if she can carry a little of that faith back without dropping it." Somebody in the second row snorted. Somebody else said amen under their breath. The councilman smiled like a man cataloging a story he might use later. After people came up with questions that came wrapped in stories. A grandfather told about a corner store that changed hands and lost its soul. A young teacher asked where her students could plug in laptops when the school library closed at 5. Avery kept answering until her legs hurt. She watched Malik talk to a line cook about truck permits like a man turning a scary form into a manageable list. She watched Zoe play tic-tac-toe with a kid 2 grades older and insist on fair ties. When the room thinned and the chairs made that scraping noise chairs make, Avery found Malik by the exit. He looked like a person who had stood through a winter wind and found he had not blown away. "I do not know how to do slow trust," he said. "Mine has a habit of rising fast and crashing faster. I am trying to let this one simmer." She nodded. "Simmering is how biscuits get their patience," she said. He made the face he makes when he is trying not to smile. Zoe looked up from her drawing and said, "We are having stew tonight, because Dad says stew is like a plan you let sit on low until the carrots decide to be part of the team." Avery laughed. She did not take his hand. She did not ask for anything. She went home and slept with the kind of exhaustion that feels like being anchored instead of dragged. The micro-grant committee met at a church basement with coffee and styrofoam cups and a tin of lemon bars that someone's aunt insisted on sending. There were 7 applications for 4 grants. Malik's was not the prettiest packet, but it read like a person who knows what a morning rush feels like. He included a cost breakdown for a used food truck, a schedule that kept him from missing bedtime, and a menu that had 2 items marked not for sale because they were Zoe's practice recipes, and she said they were not ready for the world. The committee voted with sticky dots. Malik's packet ended the meeting with more dots than lemon bar crumbs on the table. When he got the call, he was standing under the neon egg fixing a jammed napkin dispenser. He let the voice say the words twice before he let himself believe them. The grant covered licenses, first month's insurance, a refurb on a truck with good bones. The cooperage added the dollar rent and a calendar of weekend spots in the courtyard. The city contributed a list of inspectors with a reputation for fairness. The diner owner surprised everyone by cheering the loudest and insisting they paint the egg emblem on the side so the story could travel. Avery learned about the award the same way the rest of the neighborhood did. A flyer taped to the cooperage door said, "New truck coming, Zoe's biscuits and Orbits." Malik had slipped in a late joke when he handed in the packet. He had named the business for the 2 things that made his morning circle make sense. When Avery read it, she sat on the loading dock steps and laughed until she cried. It was relief and something else, too. She did not text Malik to congratulate him. She bought 200 paper napkins embossed with tiny rocket ships and sent them with no return address. The first Saturday, they rolled the truck into the cooperage lot. The river breeze did the small gift of not being too much. Malik wore a baseball cap because Zoe had said it made him look like the captain of a ship. She stood on a step stool and took cash at a folding table. The biscuits came out like a series of small sunrises. The line stretched and curved like a question mark, and then uncurled into an exclamation. Avery arrived late on purpose. She did not want to take space that did not belong to hers. She stood off to the side until the press in front of the order window thinned. When she got close, Zoe's face did that spark thing children's faces do when something they wanted for a long time happens in public where everyone can see it too. "We sold out of Orbit jelly," Zoe whispered like it was a secret she could not hold. "We have plain and honey and a test flavor I named Midnight." "One plain, one midnight," Avery said, and then she looked at Malik. He held her gaze for a second, long enough to be a choice, and then turned to split the biscuits with the back of a spoon. "Thank you for not putting my name on that flyer," she said. He handed her a tray. "Thank you for not trying to hand me a set of keys when what I needed was a map." She took the first bite and closed her eyes. The biscuit was warm and held together just enough. It tasted like work that did not call attention to itself. That afternoon, a reporter from the local paper came by, drawn by the line and the glow. She took pictures and asked who had made the grant possible. Malik gestured to the committee list. He named the women and the one man who had argued about which costs were mandatory and which could wait. He did not say Avery. He did not need to. When the piece ran 2 days later, it mentioned the cooperage as a partner and listed the micro-grant donors. Avery's name was not there. She preferred it that way. She had been learning the line between help and pride and how thin it can be when you are not careful. That night, when the city got quiet like it does on Sundays, Malik knocked on Avery's door. He had Zoe on his hip, her curls exploding out of bedtime containment. Avery opened in socks and a sweatshirt with the cooperage logo. Malik held up a paper bag that smelled like honey and a kind of sharp cheese. "We had extra," he said. "The good kind of extra." Avery took the bag and then stood with the door open like a person who had finally realized some doors are supposed to be open. "Do you want to come in?" "We cannot stay long," Zoe said in the tone of a 7-year-old who had learned to be gracious. "We have to put rockets on our toothbrushing chart." They came in. They sat on the floor with plates because sometimes the floor is the right place. They ate biscuits and talked about how hard it is to keep flour out of your shoes. When Zoe nodded off with her head on Avery's knee, Malik looked up and did not look away. "I am still afraid," he said, "that I will owe you a thing I do not have the words to pay back." Avery shook her head. "You gave me something first," she said. "You gave me the chance not to be my job for a night. You handed me a reason to remember that these drawings we make are supposed to hold people, not polish our names. You paid me in advance." He looked at her like a person who is testing whether the ice would hold and beginning to believe it might. A year later, the block looked like a photograph someone had been adding color to slowly. The new facade over the diner kept the neon egg, but replaced the shaky wiring. The upstairs held studios for people who made furniture and quilts and music, and the rent had a cap that kept the math from turning cruel. The cooperage's courtyard had string lights and a rule that said no amplified sound after 10 because sleep is also a community good. The food truck lineup had grown and shrunk and grown again as ideas tried on their legs. Zoe's Biscuits and Orbits had a breakfast sandwich named The Launch that sold out most Saturdays. Once a month, they drove the truck to the elementary school and handed out half-price biscuits to anyone with a library card. Zoe had an apron that said Mission Control. She wore it like a cape. The development group made less than it could have if it had leveraged the block into a new skyline. Cole and Stone picked up 2 new projects from people who had watched the slow, careful way the first one happened. Their investors sent emails with words like surprising but sustainable. Avery slept without grinding her teeth for the first time since graduate school. She and Malik had learned the choreography of 2 lives that came with different tools. They moved slower than the part of her that liked to decide loved, but they moved. There were Sunday mornings when he stood at her kitchen counter, flipping pancakes while she annotated a plan set, and Zoe discussed space weather with a level of seriousness that can make a whole day better. There were afternoons when she left a meeting early because Malik texted a photograph of a doe that had risen like a modest miracle and invited her to come watch him punch it down. There were nights when she said, "I need to be seen with you," in a place where people used to nod at me like I was wind, and they went and stood in line for snow cones and let the line hold them up. They did not get a gala. They did not want one. They did get a block party the day the last scaffolding came down. Someone set up a stage that wobbled and then stopped wobbling after 2 neighbors named Laverne and Big Earl found a better screw. A brass band tuned up with the patient chaos that makes joy sound earned. The fire captain came and ate a biscuit in street clothes. The councilman made a short speech and then did the right thing and sat down. Avery took the mic once not to make a big statement, but to thank people whose names had not been on flyers. The line cooks who had kept the grease traps legal. The 6th graders who had painted the mural and included the egg without being asked. The grandmothers who had sat in 3 meetings in a row to make sure the new benches had backs because good sitting is a basic right. She ended with a story because that was always the best way to make a building true. She told about a night when the rain came sideways and a stranger said, "Just help someone else when it is your turn." She did not say his name because everyone knew it. She put the mic down and stood in the light like a person trying not to collect any more than she had already been given. Malik came up without fanfare. He put his hand on the small of her back, which in another life might have been a proprietary gesture, but this time felt like a way of telling the room we did not build this alone. Zoe ran in circles with 2 friends giggling loud braids like punctuation marks, adding emphasis to joy. An older woman Avery had never met squeezed her arm and said, "You did not mess it up." That is a bigger compliment than it sounds. Later, when the sun dropped and the string lights did their modest magic, Malik and Avery sat on the curb with paper plates in their laps. The music rolled over them in a warm sheet. Zoe fell asleep with her head on a folded sweatshirt. The egg glowed like a small moon that had agreed to stay. "Do you ever think about that night?" Avery asked the rain one. "Every time I start a truck," Malik said. "And do you still wait for the bill?" He smiled this time with his eyes, too. "Sometimes," he said, "I send one to myself. It says, 'Remember to be the person who holds the jump pack, and remember to let someone hand it to you when your hands are too full.'" She nodded. She reached for his hand without ceremony. The air smelled like cinnamon and new paint. The river moved like a giant, patient animal. "You know, Malik said you could have built this block quieter, made more money, left the rest of us with a nice plaque." "I know," she said. "I did not need more quiet." He looked at her with a gratitude that tasted like something not owed. He pressed her hand once and then let go so he could go flip the last batch of biscuits for the stragglers. Avery watched him move toward the truck with that steady gait she had noticed the first night and understood in a different way now. She looked at Zoe, who stirred, sat up, and leaned into Avery's side like a choice we are allowed to make without checking a ledger. The band eased into a softer tune. The block hummed. The cooperage's big doors stood open. The neon egg threw gentle light on faces that had learned each other's names. Somewhere in the mix of clatter and conversation, Avery felt the exact weight of the thing that had begun with a gas can in the rain and a stranger's last $25. It was not a fairy tale. It was sturdier than that. It was a house they had built with papers and people and the right kind of stubborn. On the drive home, Malik rolled down the truck's window to let the night in. Zoe leaned against the seatbelt, eyes heavy, voice small. "Dad, did we make a new planet today?" "Maybe a small one," he said. "The kind with gravity just strong enough to keep the good stuff from floating off." Avery, following behind in her car, watched the brake lights ahead pulse and settle. She thought about the words she wanted to say to the people she had not yet met on the next block. They would change carefully. She thought about the small human miracle of being chosen with open eyes. She thought about a sentence that had started as an instruction and become a way to carry a life. Just help someone else when it is your turn.